What's good? It's Woog. I just want to get into this upcoming Verzuz battle between Cypress Hill and ONYX. Now, going forward, I do want to release individual videos on Cypress Hill specifically and ONYX specifically. But in this one, I want to get into why this battle matters and why these two groups or bands hold such an esteemed place in hip-hop history. So this is kind of interesting because these two groups sound nothing alike. Cypress Hill from Southern California, ONYX from Queens, New York. To be specific, Cypress Hill is from Southgate, even though Be Real was growing up in all different parts of LA, from, Compton, South Central, Southgate. And ONYX is from South Jamaica, Queens, which, from a hip hop perspective is usually, attributed or linked with artists like the Lost Boys, 50 Cent. But one thing that makes this battle interesting is because this is a case of two groups that were doing some very cutting-edge pioneering things vocally. You had Cypress Hill, where Be Real, who kind of emerged as the front man, he would kind of modulate his voice to kind of get a different type of sound. Like he was doing this thing to really separate himself from the crowd in terms of how MCs were sounding at the time. And at first, he was, kind of insecure about his own vocal delivery, and he just had to, quote-unquote, find his voice, which he obviously eventually did, and it's become one of the more iconic sounding voices on a hip hop track. Very unique style. And then you've got ONYX, who is almost as much vocally heavy metal as they are rap. Now, granted, Sun Z, also known as Suave or Sonny Caesar, along with the two biggest stars from the group ONYX, Sticky Fingers and Fredro Starr, are very underrated MCs. Like, if you listen to, Sticky Fingers verses, like on the second ONYX album, track 2, which was the second single from the album called Last Days, listen to Sticky Fingers' delivery, listen to his lyrics. You can hear how he actually influenced Eminem in a lot of ways, which is also why Eminem included a Sticky Fingers verse along with RBX on his song Remember Me from the Marshall Mathers LP. Sticky Fingers was really good at just, kind of sounding ironic. And yes, this was all super hardcore rap. I mean, that's what ONYX was. But you could hear the wit within the bars of Sticky Fingers especially. Fredro Starr was dope too, but Fredro Starr just had this monstrous yell, especially in that first ONYX album, Back the F Up. So on one side, you had Cypress Hill, who was kind of doing this Dr. Green Thumb. And then you had ONYX, who, I can't think of another. Let's see. Are there any other MCs or groups that you could think of that have prominently, they don't mix it in, but they mostly yell in all of their verses? I'm thinking early Busta Rhymes. I'm talking his Tribe Called Quest feature on Scenario, and maybe all the way up to the coming solo debut with Woo-Ha. By the way, I just saw Busta Rhymes at one of those Dave Chappelle Netflix is a Joke specials at Hollywood Bowl. This was 2-3 days before Dave Chappelle got attacked. But the featured performing artist was Busta Rhymes. He could still kill the show, and his vocal presence, stage presence is still what it was. The chemistry between him and Spliff Star, still great. But yeah, Busta Rhymes did a lot of yelling, and then I would say M.O.P., Mash Out Posse, yeah! All their verses were just yelling at the top of your lungs. And again, I think ONYX kind of dialed it back as the albums continued, but certainly with that debut, Back the F Up, and then even into that second album, All We Got Is Us, it was a ton of just yelling, hardcore rap, super rugged. It just was very dark and very menacing, very threatening, violent music. But they would also kind of mix in a lot of just street portrayals and different observational styles of rap. Especially, again, Sticky Fingers. Fredro Starr, again, in that debut album, had a very unique yell. It's almost like, how does this even translate into a live show? How can you guys sustainably keep on yelling like this at the top of your lungs? This was kind of it was more akin to, mosh pit, punk rock, heavy metal type culture than it was the traditional hip hop that was taking place at the time. And we'll get a little more into that. But another thing that's interesting here is, Cypress Hill, they were often on the bleeding edge of, marijuana, cannabis advocacy. I mean, Be Real to this day has his own cannabis-related products, events, and so forth. I remember, by the time they were releasing their third and fourth album, this would be after Temples of Boom. So we're talking Cypress Hill 4 in 1998 and then Skull and Bones with 2000. Those are the albums that had Rap Superstar was on Skull and Bones and Rock Superstar, Skull and Bones. Dr. Green Thumb was Cypress Hill 4. But yeah, they started to headline festivals like the Smoking Grooves Tour, along with, cannabis inspired bands like Cottonmouth Kings, Slightly Stupid. So they would be on all of these bills, Marley Family, where the genres on the lineups are so mixed up and diverse. Yeah, Cypress Hill was kind of a crossover sensation in that way, where their reputation and name kind of preceded them. Somebody might only know like 5 Cypress Hill songs, but they know the band, they know the faces, they know the sound, they know the relevance and contribution to, the high times weed culture. Almost like a rap Cheech and Chong, kind of like Method Man, Redman, maybe even more so, but I don't know, it's close. But Cypress Hill was obviously doing it. I was going to say doing it before Redman, but Redman kind of debuted with his album in 92. Cypress Hill debuted in 91. So yeah, they would still be a little bit before Redman, but both Cypress Hill and ONYX also are kind of on the part of the rap timeline that I feel has kind of been phased out and largely forgotten. And it's because it was sandwiched between, the 88, we'll say the 87 to 89 golden era of rap. This is when all of the most iconic albums from Boogie Down Productions, Rakim, some of Run DMC's later but still super relevant work, the emergence of Big Daddy Kane, LL Cool J, like 1988, EPMD was premiering at around that time, or I think that might have been their second. No, I think that was their first album. But yeah, 1998 is largely seen as being arguably the most relevant year in rap. Just if you look at the albums that were released in that year, from Long Live the Kane by Big Daddy Kane, Straight Outta Compton, Straight Out the Jungle by the Jungle Brothers, By Any Means Necessary, arguably Boogie Down Productions' best album, maybe. It was actually Strictly Business, not this one, but Strictly Business was released in 1998. Public Enemy's It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. Phenomenal year. So this era following that, which featured the emergence of bands like Cypress Hill, ONYX debuted in 1993 with that Back the F Up album. You had this period where the beats were evolving because the equipment was evolving, so the ability to sample for longer durations and to mix different samples into your beats was just more advanced than it was in a lot of these 1998, 99, even the difference between beats in 88 and 89 were different. But these different 1988 classics featured different equipment, therefore different sounds than you were getting by the beginning of the 90s. But then shortly after that 91, 92, 93 period, you then had the emergence of gangsta rap. Now, Dr. Dre did premiere with The Chronic in 1992. And so by the time Snoop Doggy Dogg came out with Doggy Style in 93, it was all but over. Like gangsta rap had emerged to where, it kind of suppressed a lot of like West Coast hip hop, like bands like the Far Side, for instance, or, some of the solo members from the Bay Area's Hieroglyphics crew, Oakland's own. A lot of the more, MC based hip-hop, traditional hip-hop style rap was kind of suppressed because of how mega gangsta rap had become, after the NWA era, then the Dr. Dre Death Row era. So you had this period that was between the golden era, 1988, and the emergence of gangsta rap, not to mention, Illmatic by Nas, where, the New York rap started to get a little bit more, street-based, and instead of, being a stylistic thing, like in the times of Big Daddy Kane, it became a little bit more like, I'm cut from this cloth, I'm from here, I'm from such and such projects, and then the music kind of reflected the type of activity that was prevalent in New York throughout the 80s and into the early 90s. So that was like the kind of environment that the young rappers emerging in the early 90s were coming up with. So you had Illmatic, but then you had Ready to Die by Notorious B.I.G. Then you had the emergence of groups like Mobb Deep, not to mention the Puffy era, where you started to have the production take on a different type of polish, because you have a mix of that on Biggie's Ready to Die. You've got the gully stuff like Give Me the Loot, where the beats sound dirty, and then you have like the more pristine and polished Juicy and Big Papa. So that was like the Puff Daddy influence, where New York rap started to take a turn by the late 90s into a more polished sound. But between, again, the golden era, 1988, and this gangster rap slash street New York rap slash polished New York production, you had artists like Pete Rock and CL Smooth, Heavy D, Redman when he debuted with What the Album. EPMD was still hot in the early 90s. You had jazz rap groups like A Tribe Called Quest, obviously, and Diggable Planets. Largely forgotten groups, unless you were like really into it at the time, like Lords of the Underground. And then you had a Black Moon coming out with Enter the Stage. This is before the Black Moon's larger group, the Boot Camp Clique, would start premiering the debut albums of Smith and Wesson, who later became the Cocoa Brothers, then back to Smith and Wesson, and then OGC, Original Gun Clappers, and Helter Skelter with Ruck and Rock, also known as Sean Price, and the Rockness Monster. Rest in peace to Sean Price. Shoot, rest in peace to Phife Dawg and Heavy D. But you had that period of 92, 93 that largely got overshadowed in the following year or two by the larger New York popular rap that was emerging and gangster rap. So that's where careers like early Cypress Hill and ONYX found themselves. Now, Cypress Hill continued to have success into the mid-90s. So they had their, Cypress Hill debut in 91. That's the one with the songs like Hands on the Pump, Sipping on the 40, Smoking on the Blunt. By the way, that last voice I did was Sen Dog. That's the other member of the band. So, you had Be Real, not to mention the producer DJ Muggs, who also mentored a young Alchemist during the Cypress Hill career. This is the Soul Assassins crew that or movement that DJ Muggs started, first through issuing like compilation albums, but then he basically had other producers that was working with him. Alchemist was one of those guys and was certainly ambitious, and we've seen the fruits of all of that labor. But yeah, DJ Muggs was on the cutting edge of a lot of the new production styles, and he kind of had like this kind of off-kilter, kind of woozy sounding beat style that just made and created this ambience and this feel, vibe in Cypress Hill's first couple albums. But that other voice, the non-Be Real voice, would have been Sen Dog, who I can't say he's one of my favorite rappers. In fact, I remember growing up, and I was too young for Cypress Hill's first album, but I was kind of with it by their third album, 95. That's the one with Throw Your Set in the Air, Wave it around like you just don't care. And then the album before that is probably recognized as their centerpiece, their Mona Lisa album. That would be Black Sunday. So that's 1993. That's the album with Insane in the Membrane. It's insane to the brain. Again, I'm not a huge... Look, Sen Dog did his thing with the band, and he obviously kind of offered a voice that served as like a hype man, even though he had his own verses too, which I wasn't crazy about either necessarily. So, his contribution to Be Real's verses and to the songs would be similar to the late Freaky Ty backing up Mr. Cheeks on those Lost Boys songs, or more recently, early Migos. So I'm talking before Bad and Bougie, when they were releasing like the mixtapes, and you had Takeoff, who was doing a lot of the Emmett Smith, like, and so for every Migos verse, you had the other two members just adding like tons of ad-libs that, obviously spiced up the song, and it kind of gave a vibe like they were all in the studio recording at the same time. It just feels like more of a family affair when the ad-libs are done in that way. But Sen Dog, the best way I could describe it is he sounded a little constipated on these tracks, like insane in the brain. Like just listen to what I'm talking about. Don't take my word for it. Listen to Black Sunday. Listen to the 1991 debut album from Cypress Hill, and you'll see what I was talking about. It's kind of funny. But yeah, Cypress Hill with that 91 debut, 93's Black Sunday, 95's Cypress Hill 3, Temples of Boom. Again, that's the one with Throw Your Set in the Air. Their popularity actually extended into 98 and 2000s albums, Cypress Hill 4 and Skull and Bones. They still were hitting some of the Hot 100 with some of their singles, and they were still charting high when their album dropped. Like the difference between their 2000 album, Skull and Bones, which debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200, versus their album 1 year later, Stoned Raiders, which debuted at number 64. Think about that, a drop off from number 5 to number 64. So their peaks on the charts, starting with their debut, was 31 for the debut, then number 1 for Black Sunday, again hit number 1. The third album hit number 3. Their fourth album hit 11. Their fifth album, Skull and Bones, hit 5, and then their sixth, Stoned Raiders, hit 64. So they kind of dropped off at basically just after 2000. They were no less relevant as, Be Real would make forays into establishing, different iconic weed brands. They were obviously still touring and doing a whole bunch of other stuff. DJ Muggs was still producing for various artists like the GZA and several others. By the way, in the early stages of Cypress Hill, one of their members was Mellow Man Ace, one of the pioneering Latino rappers coming out of LA. And so Cypress Hill, they just have their hands in so many different pots, no pun intended, but their influence in Latino hip hop, but it wasn't like the Orange County and LA Cholo style hip hop. It was like traditional hip hop, but with a Latino flavor. In fact, Be Real would be rapping a lot of the verses, kind of weaving in the Spanish or Latin lingo, as a song is called, with English. So they were pretty cross-ethnic in terms of their influence and who they were influenced by. Now, ONYX, on the other hand, I felt like their peak was a little bit more short-lived. Like, they had the Back the F Up album in 93. Then they had All We Got Is Us. That's the one with Last Days in 95. Then they had Shut 'Em Down in 98. That was pretty much their last, I would say, very relevant album. Just you could look at the charting success of the singles versus anything that came afterwards. Now, you had acting careers budding from ONYX. You had Sticky Fingers doing a lot of roles, like movies like Clockers, In Too Deep, Dead Presidents, the HBO Forrest Whitaker movie Strapped, Next Friday, Black and White. But then you had Fredro Starr, who had a starring, kind of reoccurring role on Moesha, that Brandy TV show that was super popular in the 90s, had a major role on that show. And then he was also starring in Sunset Park in 96. It's time to get live. It's time to represent. That was kind of like a big, basketball in the hood style movie in 96. Also had a great soundtrack. Look at the Sunset Park soundtrack. It had a nice song by Mobb Deep. It had a cool song by MC Lyte featuring Escape. But yeah, Fredro Starr was getting a lot of roles in the mid 90s through the late 90s, through the 2000s, the aughts, including Save the Last Dance. He was on that. So yeah, they basically, Sticky Fingers and especially Fredro Starr, had pretty good acting careers. But in terms of like the discography, it's the ONYX first 3 albums, Back the F Up, All We Got Is Us, and Shut 'Em Down, that were relevant, and then they started to drop off in terms of commercial appeal after that. You might say they had some success with Back the F Up Part 2 in 2002, but it was marginal compared to their earlier successes. By the way, that Shut 'Em Down album has a song called React, and they had a music video. It was one of the singles from the album. They were like all skating around in like hockey attire, checking each other up against the glass, and you'll find a featured verse from a young and not yet famous 50 Cent. Yeah, ONYX was one of the people that put him on, and it was largely because ONYX was a Jam Master Jay group. So when ONYX came out, they came out because they found Jam Master Jay submitted a demo. By the way, when they came in to record the demo to present to Jam Master Jay to try to get onto his label that was a subsidiary of Def Jam, Sticky Fingers wasn't even in the group yet. They actually had to call him up to try to come to the studio because one of the other group members couldn't make it. So Sticky Fingers came into the 9th inning, and basically the rest is history. He is seen as being as ONYX as anybody. But yeah, you could see 50 Cent in that React video delivering a featured verse on that ONYX song. And then they had like beef later on. In fact, that whole "your life's on the line," murder, murder, your life's on the line, that actually came from, that was a line from the Back the F Up album. So a lot of people who were into that early 50 Cent stuff probably don't even know that that's where he got the "murder, murder, your life's on the line." that was literally a bar from a ONYX chorus. But yeah, I can't wait to get a little bit further into the careers of both Cypress Hill and ONYX, but I'm very excited about this versus battle. I feel like this one's gonna go a little bit more under the radar because, again, unless a ton of people turn out from Cypress Hill, I just feel like ONYX has kind of become a little bit forgotten because of where their discography, album by album, finds itself in the timeline of hip hop, sandwiched between those two larger and you could say more iconic eras. But yeah, ONYX was as rugged as they come. I felt like their beats really evolved, by the way, between that Back the F Up and All We Got Is Us album, because there were a lot of advances in the technology also between 93 and 95. And also, again, I think that they dialed the yelling back just a little bit by that second album. But that Back the F Up, it was relentless. I can't think of too many rap albums with that level vocal aggression. But yeah, let me know what you think about Cypress Hill versus ONYX. Are you gonna tune in? What are some of your favorite Cypress Hill or ONYX songs? Obviously, ONYX had Slam, which is their signature song, but they also had some nice other ones like that Last Days, track 2 on the second album that I had also mentioned. They also had Throw Your Guns in the Air. They had Live Niggas, which was the first single from All We Got Is Us in 95. They changed the title of the song from Live Niggas to just Live with the exclamation point, basically a radio edit of this song and the song title. And that song, by the way, was also featured on the Show soundtrack. The Show was a big documentary, hip-hop documentary from Russell Simmons, Def Jam in 1995. Featured a lot of Wu-Tang, featured a lot of B.I.G., featured a lot of just, the Warren G. It was a really good and popular documentary, and it had a heck of a soundtrack. That's where the song How High with Method Man and Redman comes from. That's where Summertime in the LBC by Warren G's proteges, the Dove Shack, also made its debut. But yeah, Live by ONYX was also on that Show soundtrack. But yeah, let me know what you think about this versus battle in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love hip hop like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.